An island in the United States is inching closer to 100. And officials say the process of finding and identifying dead bodies is still on and the numbers could sharply rise. It is now the deadliest wildfire in the US in over a century. Recovery crews with cadaver dogs are working their way through hundreds of homes and burnt-out vehicles in the town of Lahaina that has been gutted in the fire. The historic coastal town on the island of Maui has been almost completely destroyed by the fast-moving inferno. But now, amidst the chaos and scenes of desperation, there's also growing anger with the handling of the disaster by the authorities. Survivors say there were simply no warnings. When asked why none of the island's sirens had been activated, the Hawaii senator said she would wait for the result of an investigation announced by the state's attorney general. She added, "We're really focused, as far as I'm concerned, on the need for rescue and sadly the location of more bodies." More than 2,200 buildings have been damaged or destroyed. Of these, 86% were residential. This as the fire tore through Lahaina, wreaking damage to the tune of $6 billion and leaving thousands of people homeless. Officials say the identification of bodies has become extremely difficult and they're now appealing for those with missing relatives to give DNA samples. Hawaiian Congresswoman has told the media that officials had been taken by surprise by the tragedy. She said, "We underestimated the lethality and quickness of the fire. It has been described as the worst natural disaster that Hawaii has ever faced, surpassing a 1960 tsunami that killed 61 people and an even deadlier tsunami in 1946 that killed more than 150 people on the Big Island." Thousands of people have been rendered homeless by the current wildfires and they are now in urgent need of shelter. Hawaii emergency management records do not indicate that the warning sirens sounded before fires hit the town of Lahaina. Officials sent alerts to mobile phones, televisions and radio stations, but widespread power and cellular outages may have limited their reach. Fueled by a dry summer and strong winds from a passing hurricane, the wildfires on Maui raced through parched brush covering the island. The most serious blaze swept into Lahaina last Tuesday and destroyed nearly every building in the town of 13,000, leaving a grid of grey rubble wedged between the blue ocean and lush green slopes. Maui water officials have warned Lahaina and Kula residents not to drink running water, which may be contaminated even after boiling, and to only take short, lukewarm showers in well-ventilated rooms to avoid possible chemical vapor exposure. Maui's firefighting efforts may have been hampered by limited staff and equipment. The powerful winds fanning the flames were generated by Hurricane Dora last week, a storm that is moving across the Pacific Ocean, hundreds of miles south of the Hawaiian Islands. The hurricane, classified as a Category 4 storm, contributed to heavy wind gusts above 60 miles per hour that ripped through Maui overnight, knocking out power lines and destroying homes. Almost 85% of wildfires in the US are caused by humans, according to the National Park Service.
People are found in houses in a huddle, holding each other because the fire surrounded their homes before they could even get out. There was nowhere to go. And these are beautiful homes that are very old and they're made of wood. Those went up like a matchstick. Nobody had morning.
On Monday we came. The Red Cross is here. The people are so kind. You know, we have food, we have water, and a place to shower, and people who love us.
Well, our church was destroyed in the fire, and a lot of our people had to get out of Lahaina, and they came into this area to stay with friends or in shelters. And this is the coffee attic, and the gentleman that owns it invited us to use it to have a church service today since we had no place to meet.
We're keeping positive thoughts and, staying strong and keep telling each other that we're going to come out stronger. With God's grace, we're all safe. We all have our family. So
before we come to church, we're like, why did this happen? But today, because of his words, Pastor, it brings me more You know, I feel more comfortable and more at peace, you know, that there's reason behind this. You know, we gotta be strong. We'll get through this.
Over time, we'll be able to figure out if we could have better protected people. That's why we're reviewing everything. And we want to do that in a very open and transparent way. But it was complicated by the fact that there were multiple fires across this beautiful island at the same time. But having seen that storm, we have doubts that much could have been done with a fiery, fast-moving fire like that.
All right, for more on this developing story, let's go across to Ramakrishnan Sridharan, consulting editor with News9, who joins us live now from Washington, D.C. Welcome back to Global Lens, Shri. Now, this is a tragedy of enormous proportions. It's been described as the worst natural catastrophe to have ever hit the island of Hawaii. You know, the death toll is nearing 100. Officials are warning it could go up much further than this. They are still looking for bodies. Cadaver dogs are being used in the process. Officials say that identification is very difficult at this point. Relatives are being requested to come forward with DNA samples. But amongst, you know, in the midst of all this chaos and grief, there is also anger. Anger that there simply weren't enough warnings. There is outrage over the fact that the sirens hadn't been activated. That's what a lot of survivors of these wildfires have alleged. And this is a question that the mayor and the governor don't seem very keen to address at this point in time. What more can you tell us about that, Shri?
So Neha, let me start with a personal trivia. The first time I ever visited the United States in the 1990s, it was actually to the island of Maui in Hawaii. So I remember that place as a beautiful, idyllic island and great, charming people who are deeply religious. So what has happened in Lahaina is truly, it's a great tragedy. A historic city has been devastated, has been burned down to the ground, literally. There's nothing left of the city, so to say. Yes, people they are angry, they are frustrated, and they have accused the local authorities of insufficient pre-fire warning, although the National Weather Service had warned Hawaii that the conditions that exist in Hawaii, much like in other parts of the US, are ideal for forest and wildfires. So this is what climatologists are calling a fire weather, Neha, where there are high dry conditions. And in this case, you also had Hurricane Dora, which was playing out off the coast of Hawaii. And the conditions seemed ideal for something like this to happen. So there was some sort of a forewarning which the National Weather Service had given to Hawaii. But now, why weren't people forewarned? Why didn't people get enough time to save themselves and get out of harm's way is something that's going to be investigated. In fact, the Attorney General of Hawaii has said that she's going to do a thorough investigation of what happened prior to the fire, during the fire, and now that the rescue effort is going on, what's going to happen now. So this is a complete investigation that's going to happen, Neha, but we still don't know what really caused the fire. But I think it's safe to assume that it was the exact same reasons which the National Weather Service was talking about, that this is a tinder box which is waiting to blow up at the slightest excuse, which could be a careless cigarette thrown by any traveler or a hiker in one of the islands, or it could be like a recent lawsuit on Hawaiian Electric, which is the power supplier to the island, has accused that Hawaii Electric did not switch off power to regions it knew could potentially face high wind situation from the hurricane. And therefore the speculation is, or what the lawsuit alleges, is that the high winds knocked down one of the power lines of Hawaii Electric, and that actually started the fire. So there are three different regions in Maui, Neha, that actually experienced these fires, and Lahaina happened to be the driest of these three. That is why we see that the devastation which Lahaina has experienced is probably the worst. The damage is being estimated at nearly $6 billion. And the other fear that people have is not just about the damage, but of how do they rebuild their lives? If people don't have money to rebuild their homes, even if they have insurance, how do they rebuild their lives? Will they be displaced by money that comes into Lahaina by way of new investment, or Maui as new investment? So those are some fears people are dealing with. So people are really looking at what kind of a future they're going to have. These are people who lived in Maui for generations together, and now they're suddenly faced with an uncertain future. So these are grim times for people in Lahaina, Neha.
Well, clearly people are looking at a very uncertain future. A beautiful coastal town seems to have been burnt to the ground. Rebuilding, officials say, could take years and years together. The enormity of this tragedy is still sinking in. Shri, we're coming back to you in just a moment to discuss our next story, which is, well, from China. In the latest war of words between China and Taiwan, China has condemned in very strong terms the Taiwanese Vice President William Lai's visit to the United States, saying he's a separatist and a troublemaker through, and that Beijing would take strong steps to protect its sovereignty. The Taiwan Vice President shot back, saying Taiwan will not back down in the face of authoritarian threats. Lai, who is the frontrunner to be Taiwan's next president in elections scheduled to be held in January, arrived in New York late on Saturday for what was officially billed as a transit stopover on his way to Paraguay for the inauguration of the president of that country. China, which claims democratically governed Taiwan as its own territory, has repeatedly denounced Lai's trip, which includes another stopover in San Francisco on Wednesday on his way home. The US, like most countries, has no formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan, but it is Taiwan's most important international backer and arms supplier, and it is required by the US law to provide the island with means to defend itself. Washington walks a fine line in allowing such stopovers by Taiwanese officials, telegraphing support for Taiwan without unduly angering China, which views them as provocative moves towards independence. China's foreign ministry issued a statement soon after Lai landed in New York, saying it opposed any form of visit by Taiwan independence separatists to the United States. The ministry said Lai stubbornly adheres to the separatist position of Taiwan independence and is a troublemaker. Taiwan is the core of China's core interests, and facts have shown again and again that the reason for the rise in tensions in the Taiwanese Strait is Taiwan trying to rely on the United States to seek independence. China is closely following developments and will take resolute and vigorous measures to defend national sovereignty and territorial integrity. That's what the Chinese Foreign Ministry has said. Now, Taiwan's China Policy Making Mainland Affairs Council has said China was the real troublemaker, pointing to its standoff this month with the Philippines in the South China Sea and continued military harassment of Taiwan. The council stated, our government firmly defends national sovereignty and security, guards the lines of defense of democracy and freedom, and will never back down, let alone capitulate. China especially dislikes Lai, who's previously described himself as a practical worker for Taiwan's independence, which clearly is a red line for Beijing, which has never renounced the use of force to bring the island under its control. Even though Lai has repeatedly said on the campaign trail that he is not seeking to change the status quo and that only Taiwan's people can decide their future. Meanwhile, Taiwan's vice president in a speech in New York urged the world to stand up against the increased threat from authoritarianism and reiterated a willingness to talk to China. He said, if Taiwan is safe, the world is safe. If the Taiwan Strait is peaceful, then the world is peaceful. No matter how great the threat of authoritarianism is to Taiwan, we absolutely will not be scared nor cower. We will uphold the values of democracy and freedom. We are already on the right track. Don't be afraid and turn back because of the increased threat from authoritarianism. We must be brave and strong to continue to grow Taiwan on the road to democracy, he said. Now, both Taipei and Washington are aiming for the US stopovers to be low-key and have called on China not to take any provocative action in response. China is likely to launch military drills this week near Taiwan, using William Lai's US stopovers as a pretext to intimidate voters ahead of next year's election and make them fear war. That is what Taiwanese officials are saying. Lai stopovers come as Beijing and Washington are trying to improve ties. That includes a possible U.S. visit by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, which could pave the way for a meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and China's President Xi Jinping later this year. Now, in April, China staged war games around Taiwan in an angry response to Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen meeting U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California on a stopover on the way back to Taipei. The One China policy is a key cornerstone of Sino-U.S. relations. It's also a fundamental bedrock of Chinese policy-making and diplomacy. Then there is the One China principle, whereby China insists that Taiwan is an inalienable part of One China to be unified one day.
When Taiwan is safe, the world will be safe. If there is peace in the Taiwan Strait, there will also be peace in the world.
All right, let's go back to Shri to understand this story better. Shri, you know, a war of words between Taiwan and China is obviously nothing new. But what is significant here is that at a time when Beijing and Washington are trying, to sort of work on their very strained relationship with some very high profile visits that have taken place in the recent past, some high profile meetings that are expected to take place later this year, including between President Biden and President Xi Jinping. Clearly, what are being referred to as stopovers by these Taiwanese leaders in the United States will be, a huge irritant for China and in the US-China relationship. While it is no secret that the US, as we mentioned, is perhaps the biggest backer that Taiwan has globally, but it is a tightrope walk for Washington, given that there are no formal diplomatic ties. Going forward, how do you think Washington is likely to deal with this issue, given that China's aggression towards Taiwan seems to always be on the up?
Right. So Neha, this boils down to one word, which is chips. And I'm not talking about potato chips, but silicon wafers, the semiconductors. Taiwan and TSMC is the largest producer and the largest share, market share owner of chips, especially at the high end. 90% of world chips at the high end are sold by TSMC. So after COVID happened, US realized what a disruption in global supply chain could mean for its own industry. Everyone will remember the waiting lines that we had for cars, for even smaller appliances, which were suddenly going out of stock, smartphones in particular. So Taiwan has assumed a far more strategic importance for the US in relation to its equation with China. Obviously, the US administration's stated policy is that of One China. It recognizes and doesn't recognize Taiwan as an independent country, but it realizes the strategic importance that Taiwan has, not just for the US, but the world at large. So when Mr. Lai said that when Taiwan is at peace, world is at peace, he wasn't exaggerating, because these days, economy and the well-being of economy is far more important for global peace. So Taiwan has been a very, very important piece of real estate that China has been eyeing. And in fact, but for US, I think China may well have made moves just like Russia did for Ukraine and Crimea before that. So it's still a possibility, but China realizes that there is Uncle Sam, the US standing squarely behind Taiwan, and it is not something easy for China to just go in there and take control of Taiwan. Therefore, every time a visit like this happens, they don't even call it a visit. US doesn't call it a visit. It's called transits. When something like this happens, China will send out its naval superpower in the waters of Taiwan to just rattle Taiwan's nerves. But by now, Taiwan is used to it. And Mr. Lai, in particular, Neha, very interestingly, belongs to a faction in the ruling party called the Deep Green, which is even more fiercely committed to Taiwan's independence as a separate entity, as a country, or a separate part of the global system. Now, There has been some softening in Mr. Lai's stance ever since he became the front runner for the elections that are due in January in Taiwan. But the fact remains that he is very fiercely independent and foresees an independent future for Taiwan, which is in contrast to the future that China envisions for the country, Neha.
Well, a very, very complex relationship indeed, and perhaps it would be safe to say that that is a description that would apply to perhaps most relationships that China seems to have currently with countries around the globe, with the exception of, I guess, Pakistan, North Korea and Russia. But since we're talking about China, Shri, our next story is on China as well. We will come back to you in just a moment to discuss this next story. Now, Pakistan, as we know, has been rocked by relentless terror attacks in recent times, with scores of civilians and security personnel losing their lives in different parts of the country. On Sunday, a convoy of Chinese engineers working on the Beijing-financed Gwadar port in Pakistan were attacked by a suicide squad belonging to the Majid Brigade of the Baluchistan Liberation Army, or the BLA. The BLA has termed the attack a self-sacrificing operation. It claims that at least 4 Chinese nationals and 9 personnel of Pakistani military were killed in this attack and several others injured. Pakistani security forces reportedly killed 2 terrorists in the gunfight that ensued. Other terrorists fled the spot in an injured condition, we are told. China's Global Times reported that the convoy of 3 SUVs and a van, all bulletproof, carried 23 Chinese personnel. An IED exploded during the attack and the van was shot at, creating cracks in the glass. The Chinese Consulate General in Pakistan's Karachi has issued a safety warning following the incident. The consulate has urged people to maintain high vigilance and strictly control large-scale gathering activities due to the severe security situation. But here's what is significant. Pakistani authorities have actually contradicted the claims made by the Baluchistan Liberation Army. They say an attack on Chinese engineers was actually thwarted by the Pakistan military and the Chinese workers were unharmed. China's foreign ministry has strongly condemned the attack, urging the Pakistani authorities to punish the perpetrators and ensure the safety of Chinese citizens. They added, any attempt to undermine the China-Pakistan friendship and the construction of the China-Pakistan economic corridor will never succeed. China is a close partner of Pakistan and its biggest source of military and economic support. But in recent years, terrorist attacks targeting Chinese nationals and their interests in Pakistan have alarmed Beijing. In April this year, a Chinese national working on the Dasu Dam, a Chinese-funded hydropower project, was arrested on blasphemy charges after an angry mob accused him of insulting Islam when he criticized a co-worker for taking too much time to pray during work hours. In April 2022, 3 teachers from China and a driver were killed in a suspected suicide bombing near the University of Karachi's Confucius Institute. The Baluchistan Liberation Army claimed responsibility for that attack as well, saying it targeted this institute because it's a symbol of Chinese economic, cultural and political expansionism. The last major attack on Chinese engineers was in July 2021 in the north of Pakistan. More than a dozen people were killed after a bus carrying Chinese engineers fell into a ditch following a fiery explosion. Also, in 2021, 12 people, including 9 Chinese workers, were killed by a blast aboard a bus carrying staff to the Dasu Dam site. Islamabad blamed that explosion on a gas leak, but Beijing insisted it was a bomb attack. A year earlier, 5 people were killed in an attack claimed by Pakistan's Taliban at a luxury hotel hosting the Chinese ambassador in Quetta. Now, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, is a $60 billion project that links China's western Xinjiang region to Pakistan's strategic Gwadar port on the Arabian Sea with a network of roads, railways, pipelines and power plants. Gwadar port, which is coming up in Baluchistan, is being developed as part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. However, some Baluch nationalists oppose the project over fears that it may enable the federal government in Pakistan to exploit the natural resources of the mineral-rich province. Baluchistan is rich in natural resources, including minerals, oil and gas. Some Baluchis argue that Pakistan's federal government disproportionately benefits from these resources, leading to economic exploitation and marginalization of the local population. Due to this, Chinese workers working on the project have come under repeated attacks.
He condemns the terrorist attack and has asked the Pakistani side to hold the perpetrators accountable. The Chinese embassy and consulate in Pakistan launched an emergency response immediately and advised Chinese citizens, companies and institutions working on projects in Pakistan to stay vigilant and enhance security measures, closely follow the security situation, guard against security risk and keep themselves safe.
All right, let's go back to Shri to understand this story better. Shri, a couple of questions. One, the Baluchistan Liberation Army claims that they've actually killed 4 Chinese engineers in this suicide bombing, whereas Pakistani authorities insist that no Chinese national was harmed. Do we really know what exactly went down here? Also, it is no secret, as we mentioned, that Chinese nationals have come under repeated attacks in Pakistan in recent times. Is this really all about the opposition that exists in Baluchistan to CPEC?
Absolutely, Neha. So on the first question, Neha, well, it is a claim by Balochistan Liberation Army that it has indeed killed certain Chinese engineers, 4 they've said, but there is no evidence which they have put forth to substantiate or back their claim. So we just have to take them for the word, and both Pakistan and China have denied that anyone was even hurt, forget about getting killed in these attacks. So unless there is more evidence forthcoming, we'll have to go with we just have to keep in mind what both these parties are saying here. Now, coming to this question, this won't be the last attack. This is not the first attack, and it won't be the last attack on Chinese and China investments in Balochistan, Neha, simply because we really don't know. With $65 billion of investment which China has committed to this area as part of its one border, one road objective, what it calls a new Silk Route, whether Pakistan has actually handed over control of this territory, which has been very troublesome, going way back to 1948, soon after the two countries, India and Pakistan, gained independence from Britain. From that time, this has been a problematic area for Pakistan. So one doesn't know whether China has effectively ceded control of this strategically important region to China in some sense, because China is not going to invest $65 billion unless it has safety and security of the investments. It can protect those investments. Remember, it's not going to invest even $1 billion if that investment is going to be under threat. So we don't know what kind of assurances Pakistan has given or what kind of rights Pakistan has given to China to make this large investment in this area, because it's not just a question of the deep sea port. China is also building several industries around the port, which is going to play a very important role, not just in terms of creating employment within Pakistan, but also catapulting and Pakistan's exports and also the economy, because we know that Pakistan's economy is in dire straits right now, and it is being bailed out by IMF repeatedly. So it's in desperate need of money. So this money is like a lifeline. It's like, a patient, anemic patient getting blood. So this is what is happening, and even the Reserve Bank of Pakistan, the Central Bank of Pakistan, doesn't know what are the terms and conditions under which money is coming into this region for the investment. In fact, the Central Bank has been on record to say that we are not aware. So there's a lot of opacity around this investment and what is happening here and what kind of arrangement Pakistan has with China, Neha. The other interesting bit I want to mention is that the man, although this talk about Pakistan collaborating with China for the Gadar, developing the Gadar deep sea port, has been going on for, going all the way back from the mid-50s, it really got legs when Nawaz Sharif became the prime minister. So now, as we discussed on this show a few days ago, if Mr. Sharif comes back, Nawaz Sharif comes back as the Prime Minister of Pakistan, well, this region could, take on a totally different shape. And hence, the Balochistan Liberation Army and the other separatist groups which are there are very, are very cautious, and they want to make sure that for no reason this becomes a little China within Pakistan. So that's really what is going on in this area, Neha.
Very interesting indeed, and this is the story we'll continue to track closely here on Global Lens. Thanks so much, Shri, for joining us from Washington, D.C. and sharing your perspective with us on the top stories on Global Lens tonight.
My pleasure, Neha.
Thanks for that, Shri. And let's in fact now play out for you this special News9 Plus documentary that we have on the ground situation in Balochistan. Take a look.
Pakistan is actually genociding Baloch people.
The Pakistanis are exploiting them. Not just Pakistan, now the Chinese have also gotten because of Gwadar.
Baloch feel that now they're becoming a colony of a colony.
So for them, the time to act, it is now or never.
See, Balochistan is the largest province in Pakistan, but shockingly, it is also the poorest. And ever since 1947, there have been multiple insurgencies that have started in the region, which started, in fact, impacting the Pakistan army because they were in the direct line of fire of the Baloch rebels. And since 2005, there was an interesting turn of events when the Baloch Liberation Army actually arrived on the scene, and it began by launching rocket attacks in the Kohlu district against the Pakistan army and the deep state of Pakistan.
By and large, the perception has prevailed that the Baloch population does not get its share of development, the overall allocation of resources, etc., which should lead to its development.
Well, over the last many decades, there have been several Baloch leaders that have come on the scene who have been living in exile outside Balochistan and leading the movement for the liberation of Balochistan from the forceful occupation of Pakistan. And one such leader, a woman leader, is Naila Qadri Baloch, who has been living in exile in Canada and leading the resistance movement from there.
Pakistan is actually genociding Baloch people. So being Baloch is a crime. If you are a Baloch, it means in the eyes of Pakistan, you don't have any right to live.
In February 2006, 3 Chinese nationals along with a Pakistani driver were killed near Quetta, Balochistan. The Chinese were employed as engineers at a cement factory near the town of Hub. Soon after the incident, the Baloch Liberation Army claimed responsibility for the attack. And what began as attacks against the Pakistan Army and the deep state has now spiraled into attacks on the Chinese interests and the Chinese nationals who've been working across Balochistan.
All right, time for us to slip into a quick break here on Global Lens. Don't go anywhere. We have lots more for you on the other side.
China won't let us rest easy on our borders, but they will keep flooding our markets. What does Xi Jinping really want?
I think he wants the Indian market, no doubt about it.
It's really a matter of showing their dominance.
India